Good morning, my dear students. This is Somasundari, Social Department. Today we are discussing about History Unit 4. The topic is Arab-Israeli War. Before starting the class, I will ask few questions from previous topic. Are you ready? Okay, let's start. Marshall Plan founding ended in dash. Question number 1. Marshall Plan founding ended in dash. Answer is 1951. 1951. Question number 2. When was Turkey joined the NATO? When was Turkey joined the NATO? Answer is 1952. 1952. Question number 3. When was Germany joined NATO? When was Germany joined NATO? Answer is 1955. 1955. Question number 4. Warsaw Pact dissolved in dash. Warsaw Pact dissolved in dash. Answer is 1991. 1991. Question number 5. When was CENTO was dissolved? When was CENTO was dissolved? Answer is 1979. 1979. Question number 6. The NAM held its first conference at dash in 1961. The NAM held its first conference at dash in 1961. Answer is Belgrade. Belgrade. Question number 7. Dash treaty was open to any Arab nation desiring peace and security in the region. Dash treaty was open to any Arab nation desiring peace and security in the region. Answer is Central Treaty Organization. Central Treaty Organization. Question number 8. The United States and European allies formed. The United States and European allies formed. Answer is NATO. NATO. Okay, children, I hope you are all got correct answer, isn't it? Well done. Now we are going to today's topic, Arab-Israeli War. The Treaty of Versailles had provided for mandates in Turkish Arab Empire. France was given the mandate for Syria and Lebanon, and Britain for Iraq, Palestine, and Jordan. This arrangement upset the Arabs since they had expected independence at the end of World War I. Britain promised to Zionist leader that would allocate one of Arab lands, Palestine, to Jews settlers from Europe, further embittered the Arabs. There was growing Arab antagonism towards Zionist settlers, as they bought land from rich Arab and evicted the local peasant families who had been cultivating it for centuries. At the end of October 1945, the Jews' underground organizations like Irgun Zvi Legmi and the Stern began to launch terror attacks on a large scale. Railways, bridges, airfield, and government offices were blown up. The British government presented the dispute to the UN for a decision. Succumbing to the pressure of great powers, the UN resolved to partition the British Mandate of Palestine In a Jewish state and an Arab state, clashes broke out almost immediately between Jews and Arabs in Palestine. Zionist movement. In Palestine, the ancient home of Jews, only a few thousand Jews were living in 1900. Some 15 million were scattered around Europe and North America. In 1896, Theodor Herzl, a Viennese journalist, published a pamphlet called The Jewish State, in which he called for the creation of Jews' national home. Next year, the World Zionist Organization was founded. The Israelis won control of the main road to Jerusalem and successfully repulsed repeated Arab attacks. As a result, a separate armistice agreement between Israel and each of the Arab states, a temporary frontier, was fixed between Israel and its neighbors. In Israel, the war is remembered as its War of Independence. In the Arab world, it is treated as the Nakba, as a large number of Arabs became refugees. Israel was admitted into the UN immediately, much against the wishes of Arabs. Next, Suez Canal crisis in 1956. In Egypt, in a coup in 1952, Colonel Nasser became the president. In 1956, he nationalized the Suez Canal, which undermined British interest. With the failure of diplomacy, Britain and France decided to use force. Israel saw this as an opportunity to open the Gulf of Aqaba to Israeli shipping and put a stop to Egyptian border raids. On 29 October, Israeli forces invaded Egypt. Britain used this opportunity to demand that its troops be allowed to occupy the canal zone to protect the canal. Egypt refused, and on 31 October, Britain and France bombed the Egyptian airfields and other installations as well as the Suez Canal area. However, under pressure of world opinion, Britain and France ended hostilities on 6 November. India, represented by Nehru, played a crucial role in resolving the crisis. Now, I explain Arab-Israeli War, 1967. Ever since the formation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, it is an umbrella political organization representing the world Palestinians, all Arabs and their descendants who lived in mandated Palestine before the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. It was formed in 1964 to federate various Palestinian groups that previously had operated the clandestine resistance movements. Yasir Arafat was the most prominent leader. Who was the most prominent leader of PLO? Yasir Arafat. Israel came to be attacked frequently by Palestinian guerrilla groups based in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Israel resorted to violent reprisals. In November 1966, an Israeli strike on the village of Al-Samu in the Jordanian West Bank left 18 dead and 54 wounded. Israel's air battle with Syria in April 1967 ended in the shooting down 6 Syrian MiG fighter jets. In his bid to demonstrate Egypt's support for Syria, Nasser mobilized Egyptian forces in the Sinai, seeking the removal of UN emergency forces stationed there on May 18. On May 22, he closed the Gulf of Aqaba to Israeli shipping. King Hussein of Jordan signed the Mutual Defense Pact with Egypt. Accordingly, it was decided to place Jordanese forces under Egyptian command zone. Iraq to join the alliance. Now, I'll explain. Write short note of Yasir Arafat. In 1969, Yasir Arafat became the chairman of the PLO's executive committee, a position he held until his death in 2004. Yasir Arafat was appointed commander-in-chief of the all-Palestinian Arab guerrillas forces in September 1970. Wearing a discussed pistol and carrying an olive branch and dressed in a military uniform, his appearance raised world awareness of the Palestinian cause. Arafat was elected by the Central Council of the PLO as the first president of the State of Palestine on April 2, 1989. Israel offensive. Following the mobilization of Arab states by Nasser on June 5, Israel staged a sudden preemptive airstrike that destroyed more than 90% of Egypt's air force on the tarmac. A similar air assault incapacitated the Syrian air force. Within 3 days, the Israelis had achieved an overwhelming victory on the ground, capturing the Gaza Strip and all the Sinai Peninsula up to the east bank of Suez Canal. I'll explain Arab-Israeli War 1973. Egypt and Syria under the President Anwar Sadat and Hafiz al-Assad respectively concluded their secret agreement in January 1973 to bring their armies under one command. Sadat offered the Israelis a peace deal if they withdraw from Sinai. Israel rejected the offer. Egypt and Syria launched a sudden and surprise attack on the Yom Kippur religious holidays. Though Israel suffered heavy casualties, it finally pushed back the Arab forces. Arab gained nothing out of this war too. By way of mediation, they unsucceeded in asserting the hegemony over the region and its oil. Next, Vietnam War. By the end of Second World War, Viet Minh controlled the northern half of Vietnam. Viet Minh formed a government led by Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi. This Viet Minh government quickly occupied the southern half of Vietnam. However, the Allied power decided at Potsdam that the British in the south and the Chinese in the north should define Indochina from the Japanese. But Ho Chi Minh had established his control very firmly, and so early in 1946, the British and Chinese troops had to withdraw, leaving the French and Viet Minh to confront each other. In March, the two governments reached an agreement by which North Vietnam was to be a free state within an Indo-Chinese federation. In 1949, the French attempted to secure the support of the population by declaring Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia independent within the French Union, retaining only foreign affairs and defense under French control. While the French were receiving considerable financial aid from America, the Viet Minh were helped by the new Chinese Communist government. The French troops were evenly defeated. The Geneva Conference that met on Korea and Indochina decided that Vietnam was to be an independent state but temporarily divided. The Viet Minh to control the north and Bao Dai, the head of the government, the south. Cambodia and Laos were to be an independent. With a population of 16 million, North Vietnam became the communist state with Ho Chi Minh a president. South Vietnam, approximately of the same size of population, was ruled by Ngo Dinh Diem.
War in the history of the United States. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be learning more about the Vietnam War. As part of the Cold War, the Vietnam War was a struggle against communism and an effort to limit its expansion.
If this little nation goes down the drain and can't maintain her independence, ask yourself what's going to happen to all the other little nations.
In 1954, Vietnam was split into two zones at the Geneva Conference. In North Vietnam was the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, which was a communist state led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam was non-communist, and its first president was Ngo Dinh Diem. By mid-1955, Diem initiated a campaign denouncing communism. Suspected communist activities were punished with jail time and even death. His regime lost popularity to the point where a significant portion of South Vietnam supported the communists. This prompted a guerrilla campaign to pop up in the South in late 1956. Named the National Liberation Front, this movement was more commonly called the Viet Cong. As directed by Ho Chi Minh, they used armed propaganda to fight their battles. This targeted violence was initially aimed at politicians, but grew more widespread in the hopes of unifying the country under one communist regime. In an effort to limit the expansion of communism into neighboring countries, the United States began training forces in the South towards the end of the 1950s.
It's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it. We can help them. We can give them equipment. We can send our men out there as advisors, but they have to win it, the people of Vietnam, against the communists.
At this time, with support from the U.S. government, a coup was being discussed to overthrow Diem. However, Diem was executed during the coup on November 2, 1963, without approval from the Americans. His death caused the political climate in the South to destabilize, and each new government toppled quickly. In August 1964, 2 alleged attacks on American warships were reported off North Vietnam's coast in the Gulf of Tonkin. This gave the U.S. the ammunition necessary to get more heavily involved in the conflict. That year, the number of U.S. troops deployed had risen to 16,500 from only 2,000 a few years earlier. The war escalated, and in March 1965, a series of aerial bombing attacks by U.S. and Vietnamese forces against North Vietnam commenced and continued for 3 years. During that period, Operation Rolling Thunder dropped 1 million tons of missiles, rockets, and bombs on the North. With support from the American public, the U.S. ground war also began in March 65. 3,500 Marines were sent to the South for a defensive mission, and by December, that number had risen to 200,000. However, the ARVN forces of the South experienced great losses in a number of battles over the next few months, and morale dropped. The United States then decided they must intervene even further in order to win the war. Prior to this, they had insisted it was up to the Vietnamese to end things. President Lyndon Johnson and his administration tried to spin the war and its progress in the American media by highlighting stories that showed the war's progression.
All the challenges have been met. The enemy is not beaten, but he knows that he has met his master in the field.
This made the media and the public mistrustful of the government. The Tet Offensive proved to the Americans that progress was not in fact being made. On January 31, 1968, the VCs made a surprise attack on the southern Vietnamese and Americans. They responded quickly and effectively. However, the fight raged for months and killed President Johnson's chances of re-election.
I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country.
By the time he left office, approximately 30,000 American lives had been lost fighting in Vietnam. When President Richard Nixon entered office in 1969, he began withdrawing troops. The policy called Vietnamization was put in place and was meant to help prepare the ARVNs to take over the battle. Amid even more attacks, U.S. public support plummeted further, especially after the National Guard killed 4 student protesters at Kent State University. Peace protests became commonplace on American soil by 1972, and the Vietnam War became a central issue in that year's presidential campaigns. After Nixon's re-election, he was able to negotiate an agreement that ended American involvement in the war.
A ceasefire, internationally supervised, will begin at 7 p.m. this Saturday, January 27, Washington time. Within 60 days from this Saturday, all Americans held prisoners of war
throughout Indochina will be released.
Signed January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords resulted in a ceasefire throughout the country and the release of American prisoners of war. However, fighting between the Vietnamese states continued until 1975. On April 30, 1975, the South Vietnamese capital of Saigon was taken. The war was over and communist governments took over Vietnam, Cambodia, and
The government's survival in South Vietnam depended on increasing amounts of U.S. support. In 1965, Marines landed at Da Nang Naval Base. There were 33,500 U.S. troops in the country within a month. The number increased and there were 210,000 by the end of the year. The U.S. bombed both North and South in the hope that it could force liberation forces to abandon this struggle. The fighters of North Vietnam, trained in guerrilla warfare, had grown out of spontaneous struggles against a repressive regime. They sustained their resistance without bowing to the US. The American troops also used bacteriological weapons. Incendiary bombs such as napalm and Agent Orange were used. Vast areas of Vietnam were devastated and hundreds of thousands of people killed. The American forces too suffered heavy casualties. Early in 1975, the war took a decisive turn. The armies of North Vietnam and the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam swept across the country, routing the American supported troops of South Vietnam. By 30th April 1975, all the American troops had withdrawn and capital of South Vietnam, Saigon, was liberated. North and South Vietnam were formally united as one country in 1976. The city of Saigon was renamed as Ho Chi Minh City after the great leader of Vietnamese people. The emergence of Vietnam as a united and independent nation was an historic event. A small country had succeeded in winning independence and unification in the face of the armed opposition of the greatest power in the world. The help given to Vietnam by the socialist contrast, the political support extended by the large number of Asian and African countries, and the solidarity expressed by the peoples in all parts of the world helping in achieving this. Children, now we are going to end of this session. I hope you are all observing the class properly, isn't it? Well done. Children, reading practice is very important. So you must read 2 times today's topic. Tomorrow I'll ask a few questions from today's topic. So read properly. Thank you children. See you next class.